just to bring us the tail end of the book of Exodus. And I think the reason why I want us to help us, I'm going to zone into one aspect of it, but I'll just give you a bit of an overview of those last 20 or so chapters. But the big thing I'm wanting to understand this evening is the way God walks with his people, the way that God, his presence is with his people. It starts in Exodus 3 where he says, this is who I am to Moses, and this is my nature, my character. And then I want to show how that outworks its ways into the people of Israel. So we'll do that together this evening and how that has ramifications for you and I. Let's finish it by looking at a video together. Just something I put together, a little video just for you guys to bless you. Just something as I was watching that again, just a reminder, if you got time, the Exodus 34, go read that encounter, but this is just on totally different from what we're going to chat about now. But God's engagement with Moses on the mountaintop when he says, this is who I am, and a self-disclosure of himself, gracious and compassionate, slow to anger. It is that explanation of who God is the most quoted verse of Scripture in the Bible. So the Bible quoting itself quotes that verse the most. So you'll find that verse about God's character in the book of Psalms, the prophets use it, all the way through. So if you want to study what God is like, go read Exodus chapter 34, verse 6 to 7. It's profound. So even just for free, this is something I just remember these things. That thing slow to anger. It's like sounds quick. Slow to anger. The Hebrew word for slow to anger means long in the nostrils. So what does long? If you had long nostrils, to take a breath means God is long in the nostrils. He's slow to anger. How wonderful is that? So when there's anger and then righteous anger, God. He's not a God that just reacts and flies with the handle. He's a God that, anyway, that's just for free. I just thought it was cool. Sorry. We have a God who's long in the nostrils. Wonderful. But this video brings us to this place. Moses, he's acted as a deliverer. He's responded. God says, go. And if they have this wrestle, he ends up going. And long story short, the plagues happen. There's the final plague where they put the blood of the lamb on the top of the door. Then the angel of the Lord, the angel of death passes over. The firstborn sons of Egypt all die, but the Israelites are spared. So Pharaoh says, let my people go. Pharaoh says, go. So they go. They all go, get to the point of the Red Sea. The Egyptians come behind them. The sea opens in front of them. They pass through, the waters close down on the Egyptians, crushing them, and God sets his people free. They sing worship songs, and they're celebrating, and then they go into the wilderness. And that's where we find Exodus 20, where they're at Sinai, and that's exactly what God said in Exodus chapter 3. He says, this will be my sign to you that I am who I am. When I set you free, you'll worship me at this very mountain. They arrive back at that mountain. They've done the whole journey. Moses has gone out, set them free, and set them into the wilderness where they worship God. And aside, it's an amazing thing. He says, let my people go so that they may worship me. Doesn't finish there. You know that verse? If you've ever heard that verse? When Moses goes to Pharaoh, he says to them, let my people go so that they may worship me in the wilderness. It's profound. It's another freebie. Anyway, in the wilderness. But then he gives them what is known as the 10 Commandments. And I just wanted to very quickly, why were the 10 Commandments given? They've got the promise. Abraham's promise, Genesis 12, chapter 12, there's this promise that actually I want to bless you and you're going to be a blessing to the nations. I want to bless you so there'll be blessings through you and then I'll be faithful. He says to Moses, I'll be with you. And then he gives them these 10 commandments. It's like almost these, and I think, and Christianity does a hatchet job with them, where it becomes this moralistic thing we apply and we put them on the back of the doors at our grandma's house and the toilets there so we can read them so we can look angrily at you, or we quiz our kids about them. What are the 10 commandments? What's number 7? Maybe like me, you grew up in a Christian home. If not, I apologize. That's what we did around the dinner table. We wore yarmulkes and we did that. Anyway, if you weren't here 3 weeks ago, you wouldn't understand. But 4 reasons why the 10 commandments were given. They'll be on the screen behind me very quickly this evening. Number 1, they were given to distinguish God's people. God gave them so they would be distinguished among the nations. You see, he set them free from where they had been. So as we said before, that actually he set them free from Egypt. He had taken them out of Egypt, but now he wanted to take Egypt out of them. He wanted to take them on that journey because he wanted to remind them, you're in Egypt no longer. You see, can you imagine 400 years of slavery? Though the slaves are being set free, the people are going to still respond. Though they're in freedom, they're going to respond still as slaves because that's what they've known. So God needs to give them a new direction, new distinctives, and this is what's going to distinguish you from all others. I'm going to give you a new lane to run in, and actually to remind them that you are not serving Pharaoh any longer. This is now because actually they've learned a pattern of response. This is the way we respond to Pharaoh. This is the way we respond to Egypt culture. This is the way we respond to. So God said, I'm going to give you a new parameters for living. Number one, to distinguish you from all others. Number two, not just to that, to shape God's people. Because actually he wanted to distinguish them from where they're from, but he also wanted to shape them for where they're going. Because God is not just setting them free and said, good luck. That's why the presence of God, where they say, I will be with you, is so huge. It's not a God who says, I'm going to set you free. Good luck. We'll see you on the other side in heaven. Hope they make it. No, God, all the way through, even the new covenant, we understand when Jesus comes, he says, I'm going, but I'm leaving another with you. The Holy Spirit, my very presence is going to be with you all the way. And we have to understand this, that he's actually shaping his people because he's taking them into the promised land where he says, and it's Genesis 1:26 language, where he says, you're going to be my nation, my people will be a kingdom of priests. You're not just going to be people who are going to indulge yourself. Actually, I'm going to use you to rule and reign. So I need to shape you into who you're becoming. Anyway, third point, reason why he gave them was to preserve God's people. In some translations, it says there, instead of just saying 10 commandments crudely at the top, it says the 10 commandments of God's covenant community. These are the way that the God's covenant has promised the people that he loves, his community. This is what's going to shape them. So he gives them these laws in a wilderness that's going to help them preserve themselves. If you look at the 10 just at a face value, the first 4 are directly about worship of Yahweh. The first 4 about how they worship God. The next 6 are all relational in nature to their relationship with one another. It's quite profound. 4 to do, actually, you shall have no other gods before. Those first 4 are all relational with God. The next 6 are, this is how you're going to live with one another in response to what you see me. Because actually how we see God will determine how we live, how we began this evening. But to preserve them. And fourthly, though, he also wanted to guide them to know when they had fallen short. Again, let me tell you this. He didn't give the 10 commandments to condemn them, but rather to point them to the way out. If you want to understand that in the new covenant fullness way, we don't have time this evening. Galatians 3, write this down. Galatians 3, verse 15 to 29. Paul expertly helps us understand how we're supposed to live in relationship to the 10 commandments and their purpose. But what is profound is actually if you just read those 10 commandments, just keep reading those 10 commandments, and then chapter 20 and 21, and I'll show you the homework tonight because I love you to read with this lens in line, is actually the very thing that he expounds and straight after the 10 commandments, as Malcolm started to allude to last week, is a sacrificial system. So wasn't this the courtroom? Here are the 10 things, and if you don't do this, I'll do this. Here are the 10 lines. That's it, and it's just cold, hard facts. No, straight away, it flows straight away. Chapter 20, where the 10 commandments are given, the very next thing is Moses builds an altar and worships God in that space and gives a sacrifice. Help us here. And if you keep reading in chapter 24, there's a confirmation of the covenant, God's covenant with his people. So, if you read in chapter 24, you'll find that Moses, what he did when he came and he told the people. So Moses in chapter 20 receives these commandments on his own. Chapter 24, he goes and tells the people these commandments. But as he tells them these commandments, this is what he does. He builds an altar, he kills an animal, offers a sacrifice to God. As he tells them these 10 commandments, he takes the blood of the animal and splashes it against the altar. Then he reads the commandments and the other laws to the nation. And then he throws blood towards the people themselves. This is quite a beautiful ceremony right here. Before sprinkling blood over the book of the covenant, over the tablets that he had written them down, he then sprinkles blood over those things containing the 10 commandments and all the laws. Later, he will sprinkle all the furnishings in the tabernacle that used for worship with blood as well, as also sprinkling the ministers, the priesthood who would minister in the tabernacle, they would be sprinkled with blood. You see, this is so huge that actually from the get-go, God is saying, I'm not going to relate to you based on 10 commandments. I'm relating you based on sacrifice. Even in the giving of the 10 commandments, he's not saying, actually, here's the 10 rules. If you do that, then I'll be good to you. No. Even in the giving of the commandments, there's sacrifice of animal, there's sprinkling of blood, because actually those things, this is the amazing understanding, is God says, I'm going to relate to man based on my character and not yours. This is so huge. We have to get this. Because actually God says, I want to relate to you based on my Exodus 34 character, gracious, compassionate, slow to anger, forgiving sins, abounding in faithfulness, and not withholding justice to those who have been wicked. But actually, I'm not going to base my response to you on man's. You see, let me read it this way. Exodus 24 verse 8 says this. Moses said, this blood, and my emphasis here, Moses said, this blood, not the 10 commandments, I've inserted that, but he says, this blood confirms and seals the covenant the Lord has made with you in giving you these laws. So the covenant, the promise of God that God gave his people is confirmed not by the 10 commandments, but by the blood sacrificed when giving them. So this is huge. Because in Psalm 50 verse 5, another one says this, God speaking says, bring my faithful people to me, those who made a covenant with me by giving sacrifices. So the sacrificial system, if you weren't here last week, we'll have to get the recording out soon because it was fundamental the way Malcolm packaged it. But it leads us to something, and I'm not going to go down that lane now, but something that I think can get so bizarre, and I've heard so many sermons where I've got so lost in it, going, what are they even talking about? Something called the Tabernacle. Anyone heard of the Tabernacle before? I was in sermons where I remember writing notes and going, what is he even talking about? Didn't even understand how this works out. But what's profound, we start with Colossians 2 verse 17 and Hebrews 10 verse 1 tells us that the tabernacle that Moses built are just shadows and symbols and types of the real thing. That actually all the sacrificial system in the Old Testament and all the priesthood of the Old Testament and the tabernacle of the Old Testament was just a shadow pointing that the real is coming. Actually, the book of Hebrews, as I think Malcolm expounded last week, tells us that in Jesus, he's the real tabernacle. He's the real high priest and he's the real sacrifice. But you understand that God gave the tabernacle and the details of its constructions to portray in a temporal way what he would one day do permanently through Jesus Christ. So he was showing them that actually this is how you will engage with my presence here in the wilderness and walk in this journey. Hebrews 8 verse 5 says that this is the shadow and copy of the one in heaven. So Exodus here is just a shadow and copy. So it's telling us that it's just a shadow and copy of something greater. I want to show you the something greater very quickly. You see, the tabernacle, which was we'll get to explain it now, was a portable tabernacle for the wilderness season, a place where they would offer sacrifices for sin, a place where they would offer the sacrifice of praise to God. And this tabernacle would later merge into a temple. Very quickly, if you go to the next slide, just historically, if you want to understand it, the tabernacle there, the system, 1300 BC plus minus, where Moses there, and that's Exodus 20 to 24, the tabernacle system, where it's a tent. We'll explain it a bit now. And then 950 BC is where Solomon comes and he builds the temple in 1 Kings chapter 5 to 8. He builds the temple. So the tabernacle, which was in the wilderness, so they go into the promised land and say, we don't want just the temple anymore. We take the Ark of the Covenant and the furnishings inside the tabernacle. We want to put them inside a temple, something glorious and permanent for our God. But then the temple is destroyed by the Babylonians as they get taken to exile. Though they come and destroy the first temple. Then the temple, though, is rebuilt on the return from exile, Ezra verse 1 to 2. But it's amazing that actually the second temple was rebuilt by Nehemiah and Ezra. It was not as glorious. In Haggai 2 verse 3, it says they wept for sorrow as it not being as glorious as the first one. But then in 70 AD, after Jesus came, 40 years plus minus after Jesus died, the temple is destroyed by the Romans. Just some historical understanding. And these were symbols for Jewish people of where God's presence was. Now, if you go read in the book of Numbers chapter 2, we heard something called the campsite and how they built the tabernacle. There's a diagram ahead. If you go to the next one. So I can send these on emails to you, but so helpful. So in the middle, right there, where in the real center of where it says Levi, the tribe of Levi, the Levitical tribe, was where the tabernacle would be. The tent system where they would worship and come and worship. But then in Numbers chapter 2, verse 2 to 3, God says to the people of Israel, says each tribe will have its own tent area with its flagpole and tribal banner, and that the center of these will be the tabernacle. So God is saying at the very center of our being, as we move in the wilderness, my presence is going to be in the middle of you. My presence is going to be in the very center of your thing. I want you to build your system around me. The way you move, the way you live, the way you interact with one another is with me, my presence at the middle, at the center. So God does that, but it's so profound. If you look at the diagram there, you'll see the way it was set out. And you can go read this in the scriptures, Numbers chapter 2. But to the east was supposed to be, there's 4 tribes in particular, and the other tribes around them, was the tribe of Judah, which is represented by the lion. That was that's why Jesus is called the Lion of the tribe of Judah. On the west was the tribe of Ephraim, which is the ox, represented by the ox. The south was Reuben, which is the tribe of Reuben, which is the man. North is the tribe of Dan, which is the eagle, which is so profound because actually this is not just some isolated quick thing. If you keep reading through Scripture, the book of Ezekiel, it's this weird prophetic vision, Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 10. Ezekiel, this prophet, has this vision of the end times. And what does he see here? He sees this understanding, this language of a creature that looked like an lion, an ox, a man, and an eagle, the 4 faces. And then in the book of Revelation, the apostle John on the island of Patmos, Revelation 4, verse 7, he sees these 4 living creatures, the lion, the ox, the man, the eagle, and they surround the throne of God. So it's just amazing. So sometimes if you read the book of Revelation, you're like, what the heck is going on here? Well, this is narrative all the way through. This is not just some odd envision thing and a weird thing that doesn't fit in. This is narrative that's going somewhere. But what is so profound is that the Levite tents right there, so the people, they're supposed to surround themselves like that. But right in the middle, the Levites, the tribe of Levi, they were to be clustered closest around the tabernacle as ministers to God, and their job, primarily, as the sacrifices were given, they were to shield the people from the wrath of God. Because as they sprinkled the blood, they were going to go minister on behalf of the people that are surrounded. They were there, the tribe of Levi, to shield the people from the wrath of God. So at this point, I'd love to show us one more video, because it helps bring it quickly in clarity. Kay Warren, hit it. Thank you to Rick and Kay Warren. Something that's profound, very quickly, just for time's sake. There's so much, just in the last little while, I've been reading so much around the tabernacle and understanding God's relation with us and what He's trying to do, but I'll bring it to land for us practically here. If you go to the next slide very quickly, just a quick slide of the tabernacle, the entrance there, the brazen altar, and the laver, where they come and wash their hands and wash themselves for their guilt, and they call that the outer courts, the gate, the outer courts, and the inner courts in the most holy place is deep in there. The amazing thing in the Jewish culture, there was a way, almost like a slang way, to describe the tabernacle and the 3 different components. They'll talk about there was only, as Kay Warren intimated, they say that the entrance curtain was the way. Then where you get to the brazen altar where you went in, and the laver where you wash your hands and you see your image and you reflect of who you really are and have to make and repent of sins before you carry on this journey. They call that section was called the truth. And they said the way where the altar was, they called it the life, the Ark of the Covenant, because at that place would they only be able to see life as a people. And the Jewish people would declare about their own system of worship. It's the way, the truth, and the life. And when Jesus comes, He says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father. That's why they respond and recoil as blasphemy. Who are you saying this? That you are the tabernacle, the only way. They're going to no, there's only one way, the tabernacle, the temple, to get to God's presence. The high priest sacrificial system. Jesus says, yeah, I'm coming to you. That's a shadow and type pointing to me. It's so huge when you understand this. Without Jesus, the tabernacle and those scriptures are heavy reading and pushing through and going, what are we doing here? Please bring on the book of Joshua. I need to get through here. But when you start to see Jesus, you start to see this thing is so huge. Even the mere fact, the mercy seat, the word there is hysterion. To describe the mercy, hysterion, which can be translated in other ways, propitiation. And Jesus says, as she said, Jesus is our mercy seat. We come up to that's the throne of God, which is the throne of mercy, which is the throne of our hysterion, a throne of propitiation, which means a place where the wrath of God is turned aside. On Jesus. And that's what happened there. This is so huge for us. And I want to land with this, and maybe you've heard me say this, but this is recent understanding and coming together for me. But once a year, what would happen in that area, whether it's the tabernacle or the temple. This was the place where the people would experience the presence of God, the presence of Yahweh, the distinctive presence of their God. He would dwell in the midst of them, but it was restrictive because only a few could come, because only Moses knew his ways. The people only knew his deeds. The people only stood from a distance, and only the high priest could engage. But once a year, even to this day, 2 goats on the Day of Atonement will be brought in through the people. So even in the temple or the tabernacle, you can imagine the temple these days in Jerusalem, the temple there, 2 goats will be brought in. On the Day of Atonement, which is around Passover, which is for us Easter, Good Friday, and Resurrection Sunday, that time of the year, 2 goats will be brought in, and the first goat will be brought in all the way down the people to the front, to the high priest who's presiding over the sacrifice, over this moment. And what would happen was the high priest would come and they would inspect that goat. He would make sure there's no defect, no blemish on it, and it had to be a perfect sacrifice. And they would come and what he'll do is cut that goat, slaughter that goat, and take that blood, and he alone would go into the Holy of Holies, the place where the Ark of the Covenant was the most sacred place. He alone would go in through there. And history tells us that actually because the presence of God was, if he went in there with any sin, what they would do is they would tie a rope around his leg, which had a bell on it, so that if he dropped down dead, no one else would have to go and get him. They could, if the bell stopped ringing, they'll just drag him out. That's how the presence of God. But he would walk in with the bell going, and he'll go in there with the blood, and he would put the blood on that altar on the Ark of the Covenant for once a year for the people's sin. And that blood, as he would go in, the way the system is set up, if you even look at the picture before that, I'll send it to you later, but even the temple, why it's so profound, we read Numbers 2 and say, why is it so that tribe's there in the east and this way, and why is it facing that way? It's so amazing when you understand what Jesus is doing. In the temple, that goat, the high priest would walk this way because the Ark of the Covenant would always be in the easternmost point of the temple. So he would walk, and that first goat that was sacrificed and taken, the blood taken in, was to forgive the nation of their sins for the previous year. For all that has happened. For the year that up to that point, that goat was sacrificed for those people's sins. So the high priest would go in, the bell going, praying that he'll be received at God's mercy seat, and the propitiation for the sins of not just him, but the people would be forgiven. He'd put the blood of that lamb on that, and he would go that way. The second goat that was there, he would come out, and he would take his hands, he would lay his hands on that second goat, and he would impute the sins of the people for the following year, for the year to come. He'll put the sins of the people in that one, and that's where we get this called a scapegoat. That goat would have the sins of the people, so that's where we get our word, scapegoat. He'll take the fall for the people. And what they would do, something so profound as well, he'll take the blood from that first lamb, first goat, and he'll dip a piece of cloth, a piece of linen in that blood, and thread, and he'll tie it around that goat's neck. This one here. So we have this bloody type of tag around his neck that was now in red, scarlet, there was this color there. And that goat would be led out back out the entrance, the other way, which is the western part of the temple. It's just so profound for me. And it's the fact that the first lamb goes this way to the eastern side, most eastern point. This lamb goes to the most west point. So for the past sins and for our future sins, when Jesus comes and says, actually, I forgive sins as far as the east is from the west, it's something so deep there. It's not just the metaphorical thing. This is what happens every year for the Jewish people. And what's so profound is, as that goat would go out, somebody would have to go out with that goat because that goat had to die of natural causes. And actually, that goat would go out of that temple and would have to then go up. The Mount of Olives is right there, so they'll go out. And this was happening when Jesus was being crucified. So my imagination says, as Jesus was being about to go, was a goat being led past him. Sacrifice were going on. The system was going because they did not see him. They did not understand that he was the one to come. That's just another criminal, and the goat probably would have gone past him. And that goat every year goes through up that thing, goes down into the valley on the other side, which is called the wilderness. And it was the most desolate place. And that goat would be driven out into the wilderness, but someone had to stay with that goat because that goat had to die of natural causes. So that person would watch that goat, and if that goat was eaten by an wild animal, if it fell in a ditch or had a neck broken, he would watch it till that would happen. And to prove that animal was dead, he would then go and retrieve that little thread that had been dipped in the blood and take it back to the priest. And the phenomenon happened every year. This is, if you go read in rabbinical writings, every year something would happen that when that thread would come back, that thread that was dipped in the blood would turn white when they bring it back. Every year. And on that report, based on that, only at that moment, the priest could say, God has accepted our sacrifices, and he would bestow blessing on the people. Say, your past sins and our future sins for the next year, forgiven, we can go in peace with God. And the people, thank goodness. Every year, that scarlet thread would turn white. Except for 1 year. Something changed. Rabbinical writing, if you read in the Talmud tells us that actually 40 years before the temple was destroyed, plus minus, the temple we said was destroyed in AD 70 by the Romans. But it says about 40 years before, if I do my maths, it's around about the time Jesus Christ was being crucified. It says there came a point where that scarlet thread which was brought back stopped turning white, and it hasn't turned white ever again. Rabbinical writers and Pharisees and people, and the scholars, they'll all argue and they'll put environmental factors up as reasons. They'll put this reason has happened, that reason happened. But I want to propose to you this evening, as I read Scripture and have an understanding of Jesus, that I think from that moment that Jesus died, God said, from this moment forth, no other sacrifice will be enough. No other sacrifice besides the sacrifice of my Son, the Lamb slain for the sins of the world, will be enough. And that thread has never turned white again. But here's the most amazing thing where the comes to culmination. I want to tell you this evening, as I said at the beginning, and as Malcolm has said, as we've been intimating this whole time, that we have a high priest. The book of Hebrews tells us that we have a high priest named Jesus Christ, who was the high priest who presides over the sacrifice. But here's something even greater. Hebrews tells us that he's not just the high priest, he's also the sacrificial lamb. He's the lamb that gets brought in. He's the lamb that was cast out. He's the and he's also the high priest that walks in with boldness and confidence because he is sinless and presides over that sacrifice. This is not a covenant based on if you obey this and I obey this. This is a covenant based on better promises of a high priest who says, I'll perform this ceremony. A lamb who says, I will lay my life down on your behalf. And he does it all, this amazing thing. And the incredible thing is that we have this moment where we have a high priest who declares with authority over us when we say, but am I good enough for God's presence? But I've sinned yesterday. Can I come and enter his presence with confidence? But I haven't read my Bible for a while. I don't know, where's God in my life? I'm going through a tragedy. Where are you, God? And are you near? Are you far? And we have a high priest who declares over us, though your sins were scarlet, I have washed you white as snow. Though the tag around your neck was scarlet, he says, I have washed you white as snow. And this is the powerful understanding of the gospel that I want to give us this evening, that if we don't understand this, we will not understand the presence of God. God comes in the first part, says, I am Yahweh. Sufficient, consistent, intimate. Yod, hey, va, hey. And he invites us into that relationship. And he makes a way for them because the people are rebellious and stiff-necked. He puts a system in place. But he says, actually, it's just a shadow and a type of the real thing that's coming. That actually the tabernacle is not going to be there forever because in John chapter 1, Jesus came and says, the word became flesh and tabernacled amongst us. Jesus is our tabernacle. And he says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. The whole system is set up. I'm the high priest and I'm the sacrifice. Jesus, from the Genesis 1 all the way to the book of Malachi, the last chapter of the Old Testament says that the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings. And he'll turn the hearts of the fathers to the sons and the sons to the father. Something that's so huge when he says the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings. What is so huge, this is my landing point this evening for the whole of this term, is where it says healing in his wings. That word wings, it's a poetic thing. We're like, wow, that sounds like some beautiful, something that's happening in Hollywood. Some big ethereal music. But actually, a Pharisee, when they put on their coat to minister, when they went into the temple or the tabernacle to minister, they'll put on their tassels. Their tassels are called their wings. That's what they're called, their wings. So when they go to minister, they put on their wings. And there's a moment where there's a woman in Luke chapter 7 where there's a woman with an issue of blood for 12 years. An issue of blood who'd been excluded. You do not come in through that gate. You do not even get anywhere near it. You set your camp out far, 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 far. But a woman comes, she pushes through a crowd, and actually she says, I want to encounter, I want to meet with him. She says, actually, if I just touch the hem of his garment, if I just touch the hem of his garment, what is Jesus wearing at that time? I give it to you tonight, land. That Jesus comes as a Pharisee, as a man who comes, a rabbi, a teacher in that day. He was wearing his wings there. And she says, actually, she realized that's the book of Malachi. If I just touch his wings, he's the Son of Righteousness. And there's healing in there. And just at that, he said, at her touch, power left him and she was healed. He said, who touched me? I want to say today that actually the presence of God, Yahweh is Jesus. And the presence of God is not some ethereal out there type thing. It's not like the presence of God was thick in the place. The presence of God is Jesus. Jesus. When we understand that, then we don't walk in and out of the presence of God. We don't have moments where it's there more, no, this moment, no. We understand that Jesus is the presence of God. And Jesus says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. And I am with you. Everywhere. I am who I am. And this, for me, starts to revolutionize the way we approach Christendom. We don't put a new lens on this thing of a Western culture of trying to approach God on a new age way of coming through a tabernacle. Because that's what we end up doing. We start erecting other systems. If we just do this thing, if we just worship in this way, if we don't worship like that, if we do this, we put up liturgies that come in these are the ways that get us to Him. But it actually just says, I am the way, the truth, and the life for all things. I just wanted to present that with you this evening. Stir your hearts afresh and drive you to do work. The Dubois were telling me they're reading the book of Exodus. I want to give us some homework very quickly. Exodus, to finish with, if you have time. If you don't have time, I say make time. 7 days of reading if you can. Just the outline of the end of the book of Exodus. Help you make sense of how those scriptures lead us to Jesus. How those scriptures will explode your mind and your heart afresh to worship Yahweh, Jesus, the Son of God, the presence of God. You'll encounter Him like never before when you start to see this. So if you go do that at home, read it and worship, because He tells us that actually in Jesus we have better promises, we have a better covenant, we have a better system, we have a better sacrifice, we have a better Savior. Even the whole book of Hebrews chapter 11, my final thing. Hebrews chapter 11. If you've ever read Hebrews 11, it's called the Hall of Faith. It starts by talking through all the heroes of faith. Abraham and Isaac. By faith, Abraham did this. By faith, Moses did this. By faith, it walks through all the Old Testament characters. And by faith, this. And we're like, wow. Go read all the way to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 38 to 40 says, all of these guys died not seeing the promise. And then comma says, but we have a better promise. The whole point of Hebrews 11 is not to give us some moralistic, look at Moses, be like him. It's to say, Moses was great, but there's a greater one coming. And we have access to Jesus. I want to tell you, we're living in the most glorious dispensation, the dispensation of grace. We have access to the very throne of Jesus, the very presence of God. And I say, please, sir, man, why don't we take hold of it? Because we'll never regret it. And our lives will never be the same. Father, I pray, as we land this time together, these 6 weeks together, at times higgledy-piggledy all over the place, but I thank you, Father God, give us a deeper appetite for you. And I pray right now, stir our affections for your Son, Jesus. Jesus, I love you. As Moses praised, I will not go on from here unless you go with me. Now show me your glory. And in Jesus you have shown us the fullness of your glory in Jesus, that we may know the Father through the way, the truth, and the life. I thank you for this. God, do this in my heart. Do this in us as a people. Do this for all of us right tonight. May this be our eternal preoccupation. Staring at you, Jesus. Marveling at the wonder of the cross, the wonder of what you've done for us, Jesus. May we take hold of this access in Jesus' name. Amen.